Right now, as you read this, there are approximately 9,300 active satellites orbiting Earth. They handle your GPS navigation, your weather forecasts, your financial transactions, your military communications, your internet connection, and the live television broadcast currently running in the background of your life. And they are sharing their orbital lanes with approximately 37,000 pieces of tracked debris larger than 10 centimeters each, one traveling at roughly 28,000 kilometers per hour. At that velocity, a piece of debris the size of a marble carries the kinetic energy of a hand grenade. A piece the size of a grapefruit hits with the force of a small car traveling at highway speed. And there are roughly 1 million untracked pieces between 1 and 10 centimeters currently in orbit, too small to be tracked by ground radar, too fast to be dodged if detected, and large enough to catastrophically destroy any satellite or spacecraft they encounter. We built this problem ourselves, and we are running out of time to solve it before it becomes mathematically irreversible. The story begins in 1978 with a NASA scientist named Donald Kessler. Kessler published a paper that modeled a scenario that his colleagues initially dismissed as theoretical worst-case thinking. He described a cascade effect. If the density of objects in low Earth orbit ever became sufficiently high, a single collision between two objects would generate a cloud of debris. That debris cloud would then collide with other objects, generating more debris. Those collisions would generate still more. The cascade would be self-sustaining, not because more objects were being launched, but because the debris already in orbit was multiplying through collisions alone. Kessler calculated that this process, once started, would render certain orbital bands permanently unusable. Not for years, not for decades, for centuries, possibly permanently. The scientific community initially treated this as a remote theoretical concern. It is no longer theoretical. It is a measurable, active risk that space agencies around the world classify as one of the most urgent challenges in modern aerospace engineering. The numbers are not heading in the right direction. In 1957, when Sputnik became the first artificial object placed in orbit, there was one piece of hardware in space. By 1970, there were a few hundred tracked objects. By 2000, a few thousand. The graph then bends sharply upward. The commercialization of space and the miniaturization of satellite technology driven by companies like SpaceX, OneWeb, Amazon's Project Kuiper, and dozens of smaller operators has caused the number of objects in low Earth orbit to increase by a factor that would have been considered impossible 20 years ago. SpaceX's Starlink constellation alone currently operates over 6,000 satellites, with regulatory approval to deploy up to 42,000. OneWeb has plans for 648. Amazon's Kuiper constellation is approved for 3,236. The European Union's Iris-squared constellation plans for 290. China's national satellite internet program Guowang has filed for 12,992 orbital slots. If all planned constellations are fully deployed, the number of operational satellites in low Earth orbit will increase by a factor of 10 or more within the next 15 years. And alongside every operational satellite goes its launch debris, its maneuvering history, and eventually its decommissioned shell, because no satellite operates forever, and most of them, when they fail, simply stay where they are. In 2009, the first confirmed accidental hypervelocity collision between two intact satellites occurred. Iridium-33, a commercial communications satellite, and Cosmos 2251, a defunct Russian military satellite, collided at a combined velocity of approximately 42,000 kilometers per hour. The collision generated a cloud of over 2,000 trackable debris fragments and an estimated 100,000 smaller pieces. More than a decade later, fragments from that collision are still circling Earth. In 2021, Russia conducted an anti-satellite missile test, destroying its own defunct Cosmos 1408 satellite in a demonstration of military capability. The test generated over 500 trackable debris pieces and hundreds of thousands of smaller fragments at an altitude that intersects directly with the orbit of the International Space Station. The crew of the ISS was forced into emergency shelter protocols multiple times in the weeks following. The debris cloud will remain hazardous for years. This is where Kessler's mathematics becomes genuinely alarming. The Kessler Syndrome is not a single catastrophic event. It is not an explosion that happens and is over. It is a feedback loop. Each collision generates debris. Each piece of debris has a probability of causing another collision. As the debris density increases, the probability of each collision increases. The system becomes self-amplifying, and once the cascade reaches a certain threshold, a threshold that orbital mechanics modelers believe is uncomfortably close to the current debris density in some key orbital bands, it becomes impossible to stop. The consequence is not science fiction. It is orbital denial. The most valuable orbits, low Earth orbit, at 200 to 2,000 kilometers altitude, where nearly all commercial satellites, the International Space Station, and the majority of human space activities currently operate, could be rendered permanently inaccessible. Not immediately. The process would unfold over years and decades. But the endpoint is a shell of debris surrounding Earth, so dense that launching anything through it would carry an unacceptable probability of destruction. We would be grounded, not by technology failure, by the mathematics of collision probability reaching a point of no return. The economic stakes are almost impossible to overstate. The global satellite industry generated approximately $300 billion in annual revenue in 2024. The downstream economic activity that depends on satellite infrastructure, GPS-dependent logistics and transportation, satellite-enabled financial systems, weather forecasting that underpins agriculture, military and intelligence capabilities, broadband internet access represents a multiple of that figure. A credible estimate of the total annual economic value of orbital infrastructure, direct and indirect, exceeds $1 trillion. And here is where the story shifts from existential threat to economic opportunity. Because the Kessler problem has not only generated enormous concern, it has generated an entirely new industry. The global active debris removal, or ADR, market is projected to grow from effectively zero a decade ago to several $billion annually by 2030, with some forecasts placing the long-term market value in the tens of billions. Governments, space agencies, and private investors are pouring capital into the problem. The European Space Agency's ClearSpace, one mission, planned for launch in 2026, will be the first commercial mission to capture and deorbit a piece of existing space junk, specifically a 400-kilogram rocket component called Vespa that has been orbiting since 2013. The technology being tested, a robotic arm that locks onto the debris, captures it, and then re-enters the atmosphere with it, burning up on re-entry. Astroscale, a Japanese company now publicly traded on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, has developed a magnetic docking system that can attach to cooperative debris satellites, equipped with a small ferromagnetic plate that allows future capture. Their ELSA-D mission demonstrated capture and release of a client satellite in orbit in 2022. Their commercial debris removal service is actively seeking contracts. D-Orbit, an Italian company, specializes in precision deorbit services. Rocket Lab, better known for its launch business, is developing in-space transportation capabilities applicable to debris removal. TransAstra, ClearPath Robotics' space division, and dozens of university spin-offs are competing to solve the technical, legal, and economic challenges of removing objects that were never designed to be captured. The legal framework surrounding debris removal is, to put it diplomatically, underdeveloped. Under the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, debris in orbit remains the property of the launching state. This means that removing another country's debris, even dead, dangerous debris that poses a collision risk to all operators, requires formal diplomatic agreement with the originating state. A piece of defunct Russian hardware on a collision course with a commercial constellation requires Russian consent to remove. The political and legal architecture for rapid, pragmatic debris removal does not currently exist. The economic architecture presents its own challenge. Debris removal is what economists call a public good. Its benefits accrue to all orbital users, regardless of who pays for it. This creates a free rider problem. Every commercial operator benefits from a cleaner orbital environment. but no individual operator has a sufficient financial incentive to bear the full cost of cleanup. This is why most credible debris removal proposals involve some combination of regulatory mandates, international funding mechanisms, and commercial market structures that compensate debris removers for the collective benefit they provide. The United States Federal Communications Commission has issued rulings requiring new satellites operating in low Earth orbit to deorbit within 5 years of end of mission A, significant tightening from the previous 25-year standard. The European Union has begun developing regulatory frameworks around debris mitigation. Several national space agencies have committed funding to debris removal technology development. But commitment to solve the problem and actually solving the problem are different things. The debris already in orbit is not going anywhere on its own. It will be there for decades, unless someone goes up and gets it. There is a mathematical reality at the core of this story that gives the physicists who work on it a particular urgency. The question is not whether orbital debris will eventually cause cascading collisions. At current density trends, the probability of self-sustaining cascade in some orbital bands is no longer negligible. The question is whether the cascade can be prevented before it becomes self-reinforcing, and whether the legal, economic, and political systems governing space can move fast enough to act before the physics makes the decision for them. The satellites enabling your GPS, your weather app, your financial transactions, and your internet connection are sharing an increasingly crowded highway with the wreckage of 50 years of space activity, traveling at speeds that make a bullet look leisurely. The race.
Thanks for watching Macro Explainer. Subscribe for more clear breakdowns.